Elena Johnson had always been different. In a town where most weekends revolved around high school football, barbecues, and church picnics, her heart was drawn instead to the flat expanse of prairie land stretching endlessly outside Kansas City. To most kids, the open fields looked empty, dull, even boring. But to Elena, the horizon was alive. She would sit on her grandfather's porch as a girl, peering through his old spotting scope at faraway barns, train cars rumbling across tracks, or the rare deer cutting across the wheat fields. The scope itself was something out of another century. Brass-bodied, heavy, and dulled with greenish tarnish, it looked more like a ship's relic than a shooter's tool. Scratches scarred its sides, and the tripod squeaked whenever she adjusted. The height. Her grandfather had kept it polished when he was younger, but age and illness eventually left it untouched in the attic. When he passed, Elena claimed it immediately, ignoring the puzzled looks from her parents. Of all the things you could take, you want that rusty old thing? Her mother asked. Elena only smiled. It wasn't junk. It was memory. Every Saturday after that, Elena brought the scope to the local rifle range. She was still in high school then, barely 16, carrying the brass relic with both arms like a sacred object. The range was dominated by older men with expensive rifles and scopes that gleamed under the sun. They knew her by name, but rarely with respect. When she set up her station, murmurs and chuckles always followed. "Careful, sweetheart," one grizzled man called out. "That thing might be older than you and me put together." Another chimed in. "Does it even work? Or are you just here to decorate the firing line?" Elena heard every word. The laughter rolled across the benches like gunfire, sharp and cutting. But she didn't answer. She set the tripod, tightened the screws, and leaned close to the eyepiece. The world shrank into a perfect circle. Out there, a steel plate weighted at 600 yards. Heat shimmered around it, making the target waver like a mirage. She slowed her breathing, the way her grandfather had taught her. He'd spent long evenings showing her how to read the smallest details, the flicker of grass stalks in the wind, the sway of distant branches, even the mirage lines dancing above hot earth. "Pay attention to the invisible," he used to say. "That's where the truth lies." Through the old brass scope, Elena noticed things the men around her missed. She saw how the wind changed direction halfway downrange, tugging the mirage. Left instead of right. She noted the angle of the sun and how shadows crept across the target. When she called corrections to her shooting partner, a boy she'd convinced to join her, their bullets rang out clean. Steel clanged again and again while others struggled. The laughter dimmed, but it never disappeared, even when she outperformed. The men found ways to dismiss her. "Beginner's luck," one said. Another muttered, "She probably read the answers online." The sharpest sting came when one man leaned to his buddy and whispered just loud enough, "Doesn't matter how well she shoots. She'll quit when she gets bored, like all the others." Elena packed her scope carefully after that session, fighting the heat in her cheeks. She never showed anger. She never snapped back. But she promised herself she wouldn't quit. Not now. Not ever. At school, her classmates didn't understand either. They cared about prom, sports, or college applications. Elena cared about focus, breathing, and the impossible calm of staring through that brass eyepiece. She spent hours studying books about ballistics, watching wind flags online, and memorizing diagrams of mirage patterns. Sometimes she sat in the backyard at night, turning the scope to the stars, pretending it connected her to something bigger than herself. Her parents grew worried. "Honey," her mother asked one evening, "what do you even plan to do with all this shooting stuff? You're not going to make a living staring through that antique." Elena's father tried to be gentler. "It's Fine to have hobbies, but you need to think about a career, college, a future. That scope won't get you anywhere. But Elena knew better. Deep down, she believed her grandfather hadn't just left her a relic. He had left her a test. A burden, maybe, but one that carried weight. She wanted to honor him, to prove that skill mattered more than shiny equipment or mocking voices. When she graduated high school, most of her classmates celebrated with bonfires and parties. Elena quietly applied for the ROTC program at her university. She wanted structure, discipline, and challenge. She wanted to be tested in ways the rifle range never could. Her first day on campus, surrounded by cadets unloading regulation gear, she unzipped her bag and revealed the brass spotting scope. The laughter erupted instantly, sharper than before. "Are you serious?" one cadet laughed. "Did you steal that from a pirate ship?" Another nudged his friend. "Careful, she might summon the ghost of Columbus with that thing." Elena said nothing. She tightened the tripod, leaned close, and studied the distant field markers. The world fell silent in the circle of her scope. She saw heat distortions already rising in the morning air. She measured angles, noted distances, whispered corrections under her breath. When the others took their turns, many misjudged their calls. Shots veered wide, targets stayed untouched. But Elena's partner, following her adjustments, hit clean, again and again. Instructors raised eyebrows. Cadets stared. The laughter faded to murmurs. Still, respect didn't come easily. After practice, she overheard a pair of cadets talking. "She's good," one admitted grudgingly. The other shrugged. "Doesn't matter. Should never last. People like her don't belong here." Elena carried the words with her that night, heavier than the brass scope itself. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her dorm, replaying every sneer, every doubt. But instead of discouraging her, it hardened her resolve. Her grandfather had endured worse. She remembered his stories of competition, how other marksmen doubted him too, how he'd once been the underdog who showed up with nothing fancy, only grit and practice. He won anyway. And when he won, he didn't boast he let the results speak. Elena decided she would do the same. From that night on, she rose earlier than the others. She trained longer. She studied harder. Each morning, she polished the brass scope, not to make it look new nothing could, but to honor the hands that had once held it steady. Every time she lifted it to her eye, she didn't just see the target. She saw the horizon stretching farther than others dared to look. She saw her grandfather's steady gaze, his quiet pride. And she saw a future where one day the mocking would stop. Not because she argued, not because she demanded respect, but because she earned it. And until that day came, she would keep setting up her rusted, rattling scope beside their gleaning machines, listening to their laughter fade as steel plates rang in the distance, one by one by one. Elena entered the ROTC program with nerves hidden beneath a steady exterior. On her first official morning, cadets gathered on the training field with crisp uniforms, polished boots, and equipment that looked like it came straight from military catalogs. Rifles gleamed, scopes shined, and backpacks bore the latest tactical designs. Elena, standing among them, seemed ordinary enough until she unzipped her pack. Out came the brass spotting scope. Its tripod legs clattered against the concrete as she set it up. A hush spread, followed by snickers. One cadet muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "That belongs in a museum." Another joked, "Careful, don't breathe too hard. It might fall apart." The laughter rolled in waves. Elena felt heat rise in her chest, but kept her face calm. She tightened the screws with deliberate care, unfolded her small notebook, and crouched by the eyepiece. The world shrank into a single circle again, sharp and alive. The instructor barked the drill. Observe range markers, note distances, identify environmental factors. Cadets leaned into their shiny scopes, scribbling quick notes. Elena took her time. She tracked the flags snapping in different directions, noticed how the sunlight created a subtle shimmer along the ridgeline, and even spotted a hawk circling overhead, a sign of rising thermals. When the instructor reviewed results, many cadets had guessed wind speeds wrong or miscalculated distances. Elena's notes, however, were precise. Every correction matched reality. The instructor raised an eyebrow. "Well done, Johnson." But instead of admiration, whispers filled the line. "Beginner's luck. She probably memorized it beforehand. No way she can keep that up." Elena packed her scope without a word. She could feel the eyes on her back, the doubt settling around her like dust. But inside, a fire burned. She remembered her grandfather's voice. "Let the results speak. They'll doubt you until they can't anymore." Training intensified as weeks passed. Our OTC wasn't just about observation. It was about endurance, leadership, teamwork, and the ability to perform under pressure. Elena wasn't the strongest cadet. She struggled on long runs and often finished near the middle during fitness drills. Her peers used it against her. "Sharp eyes, slow legs," one cadet sneered. "She won't make it past evaluation." But when they moved to marksmanship training, everything changed. Cadets paired off, spotters and shooters. Elena always volunteered as spotter, hauling out her scope despite the chuckles it drew. She whispered corrections steadily, her tone calm and confident. Half a click left, winds shifting mid-range. Adjust elevation slightly. Her partners hit targets again and again, sometimes outperforming even the best shooters in the group. One afternoon, during a timed exercise, her shooter hit all 10 targets in record time with near-perfect accuracy. The instructor shook his head, impressed. "That's some of the best spotting I've seen here." For a moment, silence followed. Then someone clapped sarcastically. "Maybe the antique really is magic," a cadet joked. Laughter erupted again, erasing the recognition she'd earned. Elena smiled faintly, pretending not to care. But at night, lying in her dorm bunk, she replayed those moments. Recognition flickered for only a second before mockery smothered it. Would it always be like this, her skill dismissed, her achievements diminished? Instead of discouragement, it steeled her resolve. She decided if respect wouldn't come from one victory, she'd build a mountain of them. She began waking earlier, long before sunrise. In the stillness of the campus field, she unfolded her brass scope and practiced alone. She tracked leaves, trembling in faint breezes, noted how shadows shifted as the sun rose, and studied mirages forming over asphalt. She wrote everything down in her notebook, page after page of environmental observations, ballistics calculations, and corrections. During classroom lessons, while others doodled or dozed, Elena took meticulous notes. She asked questions instructors didn't expect from a cadet. How does altitude affect mirage lines at extreme distances? How do you adjust for wind that changes direction halfway downrange? At first, the other cadets rolled their eyes. But instructors noticed. One even pulled her aside. "Johnson, you've got an unusual eye for detail. Don't lose that." By mid-semester, Elena's quiet determination began to show results. Her endurance improved. She ran farther, pushed harder, even when her lungs screamed. When others rested, she practiced spotting. Slowly, grudgingly, cadets began to notice her consistency. She didn't fail. She didn't quit. Still, the mockery never fully stopped. One evening in the dorm common room, a group of cadets gathered, trading jokes. Someone picked up her brass scope from where she'd set it down and held it aloft. "Behold, the ancient relic," he announced. Laughter roared. Elena stepped forward calmly, took it back without a word, and returned to polishing the brass. Her silence disarmed them more than anger ever could. The turning point came during a weekend field exercise. Cadets were dropped in rugged terrain with limited equipment, tasked with locating targets hidden across a valley. High-tech scopes failed under harsh sunlight. Digital readouts flickered uselessly. Frustration spread quickly. Elena set up her brass scope on a rocky outcrop. She scanned patiently, noting every shimmer, every shift. One by one, she called out hidden targets' positions others hadn't even noticed. Her team scored higher than any other unit. When they returned to base, the instructor announced, "Johnson's team led the exercise with outstanding accuracy." For the first time, there was no laughter, just silence. That night, one cadet approached her quietly. "How do you do it?" he asked, curiosity outweighing pride. Elena met his gaze, calm and steady. "You don't need the newest gear. You need patience, discipline, observation." From then on, the whispers shifted. Some still mocked, but others started to respect her. A few even asked to train with her. The brass scope, once a symbol of ridicule, began to carry an aura of mystery. Elena knew she wasn't there yet. Respect was fragile. But she also knew one truth. Every insult, every laugh, every doubt only made her sharper. And with each passing day, she was proving to them and to herself that she didn't just belong. She was built for this. The Arizona desert was not a place that welcomed strangers. It punished them. Elena felt the heat before sunrise, the dry wind scratching at her skin like sandpaper. The air smelled faintly of dust and mesquite, and already her uniform clung comfortably to her back. She stood shoulder to shoulder with other cadets on the range, staring out at the shimmering horizon. Targets waited, steel plates painted white and scattered across miles of barren ground. The instructors promised this exercise would separate observers from pretenders. Spotting in a controlled environment is one thing, their lead instructor barked. Spotting in real conditions is another. Heat mirages don't lie. Neither does wind. Let's see if you can keep up. Cadets eagerly unpacked sleek scopes. Some with digital readouts, others with modern coatings designed to cut glare. Conversations buzzed with excitement and bravado. Elena, calm as always, knelt by her bag and pulled out the brass scope. The reaction was immediate. One cadet groaned loudly, shielding his eyes as though embarrassed. "Not that thing again." Another smirked. "What's she hoping to spot? Tumbleweeds." A third muttered, "Bet it melts in this heat." Elena ignored them. She set the tripod, tightened the loose screws, and adjusted the squeaky joints until the scope stood steady. To her, it looked right at home in the desert sun-weathered brass against endless sand. The exercise began. Cadets were tasked with identifying distant targets at increasing ranges. The first few were straightforward, visible against the beige earth. Voices called out measurements and corrections quickly. Elena leaned into her eyepiece, took her time, and called her numbers softly. Her partner adjusted his rifle and struck the target with precision. As the distances grew, so did the difficulty. Heat waves rose from the ground, twisting the air like liquid. Targets blurred, vanishing in the shimmer. Modern scopes faltered. Digital readouts wavered, struggling to lock. Cadets cursed under their breath. Elena adjusted the brass scope delicately, the way her grandfather had shown her. She didn't fight the mirage, she studied it. The waves weren't just distortion. They carried information. They told her how the air moved, how wind currents shifted halfway downrange. She scribbled notes in her weathered notebook, her handwriting quick but neat. "Target at 800 yards, she murmured to her partner. "Wind right to left, 2 miles an hour at the ridge, stronger near the base. Adjust elevation 0.4. The rifle cracked. Steel rang. Her partner glanced at her in surprise, then smiled. Dead center, Whispers spread. Other cadets had missed their shots. Some squinted through cutting-edge optics and came up empty. Elena, with her rattling brass relic, hit target after target. One cadet couldn't hold back. "She's guessing." "Has to be." The instructor raised an eyebrow. "Then her guesses are better than your calculations." The laughter that followed wasn't directed at Elena this time. By midday, the heat was merciless. Sweat stung her eyes, her throat felt raw, but she refused to falter. Each new challenge only sharpened her focus. At 1,000 yards, the target nearly disappeared, swallowed by the horizon. Many cadets surrendered, shaking their heads. Elena pressed her eye closer, studying faint shadows, subtle curves of mirage lines. She saw it a flicker of white, barely breaking the haze. "Target located," she said firmly. She gave her corrections, steady as stone. The rifle thundered. When the steel plate sang back across the desert, even the instructor's jaw tightened in acknowledgement. Not everything went perfectly. At one point, a sudden gust threw her calculations off. Her partner's shot missed wide, and Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from the sun, but from frustration. The cadet beside her smirked. "See? Relic can't keep up." She breathed deeply, forced calm, reset, try again. She recalculated, adjusted, corrected. The next shot landed true. By the end of the exercise, exhaustion blanketed the group. Cadets slumped in the shade of vehicles, gulping water. Elena sat apart, polishing her scope with a rag. It was a ritual by now less about appearance, more about respect. Her grandfather had taught her to care for tools like they were extensions of herself. The instructor gathered everyone. "Today, only a handful of you managed consistent hits." "Johnson," he paused, letting her name linger in the dry air. "Your calls were exemplary, nearly flawless." Murmurs rippled through the group. Some cadets looked annoyed, others thoughtful. For the first time, not all eyes on Elena carried scorn. That evening, at camp, the mood shifted subtly. A few cadets approached her, not with mockery, but with questions. "How did you read the mirage like that? What did you see that we didn't? Can you teach me?" Elena answered simply, without arrogance. "You don't fight the mirage. You read it. It's the desert talking to you. Listen carefully, and it tells you everything." Still, not everyone was convinced. In the corner of the tent, she overheard a pair of cadets whispering, "She's good, sure, but it's all tricks. Let's see how long she lasts when it really counts." Elena didn't flinch. She'd heard it all before. That night, as the desert cooled and stars filled the sky, she sat outside with her scope. She turned it upward, away from the battlefield and into the heavens. The brass tube-framed constellations her grandfather once pointed out to her as a child. Orion, Cassiopeia, the steady glow of Polaris. She thought of him then, the quiet strength in his voice, the way he never rushed, never doubted her, even when everyone else did. He had trusted this same scope decades ago, on ranges far away. Now it was her turn to carry it forward. The desert was still, except for the faint wind brushing against her face. Elena whispered to herself, barely audible, "I'll prove them wrong." Not once, not twice, every time. The stars shimmered above, silent witnesses to her vow. And deep inside, Elena knew the desert wasn't her enemy. It was her training ground. The harder it pushed, the sharper she would become. The desert in Arizona had been brutal, but the deployment overseas made it feel like a warm-up. Elena's boots sank into a landscape of dust and broken stone as her unit pushed forward under a glaring sun. The air was heavy, tainted with the smell of burning diesel and faint traces of cordite from past firefights. In the distance, jagged mountains cut into the horizon like the teeth of some enormous beast. The unit moved cautiously through a valley where every rock seemed to hide a shadow, and every shadow could hide a threat. Tension hung in the air. Elena, now a lieutenant, carried her rifle across her chest, but the weight that mattered most was the brass spotting scope strapped securely in her pack. She still carried it, despite the endless jokes. Her squad called it the relic, the pirate's telescope, even Grandpa's brass cane. She smiled at their humor, but she never once left it behind. For her, the scope wasn't optional. It was essential. That belief was tested sooner than she expected. One morning, as the squad prepared to push through a rocky pass, a sudden dust storm swept in from the west. The air turned red-brown, grit stinging their eyes and choking their lungs. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Soldiers cursed as their advanced optics failed. Lenses clouded, sensors flickered, and screens went blank. "Damn it, I can't see a thing," one shouted. Another slammed his scope shut. Worthless in this storm. The captain raised his voice over the wind. "We need a safe route. We move blind, we're dead." For a moment, panic threatened to take hold. Then Elena dropped to one knee and unstrapped the brass scope. Even through the storm, its weight felt reassuring in her hands. She steadied, hit on a boulder, adjusted the tripod legs with practiced care, and pressed her eye to the eyepiece. The world narrowed. The dust was thick, yes, but not impenetrable. Through the brass, she could make out faint outlines, ridges, outcroppings, subtle breaks in the land. More importantly, she could read the wind. The mirage lines danced violently, shifting in directions the naked eye couldn't follow. She scanned left, then right, ignoring the laughter rising behind her. What's she doing with that thing? Someone scoffed. Might as well use binoculars from a toy store. But then Elena spoke, her voice firm. "East Pass is blocked. Too narrow. But there's a safer route northeast, along the shadow of the ridge. Winds clearer there. Less shifting dust." The captain, sweat streaking down his face, studied her. He didn't ask about her scope, didn't question her confidence. He just gave a single nod. "You heard her. Northeast, move out." The squad followed reluctantly at first, stumbling through grit and wind. But as they advanced, the path opened exactly as she'd said. The ridge shielded them from the worst of the storm, and within half an hour, they emerged from the choke point into clearer air. Behind them, the blocked pass was swallowed by swirling dust. One glance was enough to see they'd have been trapped. If they'd chosen it, the soldiers exchanged glances. Nobody laughed now. That night, as they rested by a flickering fire under the dim glow of stars, whispers spread through the camp. "Did you see how she called that? No way that scope actually worked in that storm. Maybe she just knows things." Elena cleaned the brass carefully, rubbing away the thin film of dust. Her hands were steady, her expression unreadable. She didn't gloat, didn't smile smugly. She simply respected the tool and the lesson it carried. Her grandfather's words echoed in her mind. Pay attention to the invisible. That's where the truth lies. The next days only deepened the shift. During patrols, Elena spotted signs others overlooked, tracks half buried by wind. The faint glint of glass from a concealed scope on a ridge. Even the unnatural silence of birds before an ambush. Each time, her calls saved time, or saved lives. One afternoon, while scanning a ridgeline, she spotted a faint shimmer too steady to be heat alone. She called out a warning. Moments later, a hidden enemy sniper opened fire. The squad hit the ground, returning fire with controlled bursts. Thanks to her quick call, no one was hit. When the fight ended, the captain walked over, his face grim but grateful. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Good eyes, Lieutenant. You just kept this unit alive." The mocking voices quieted after that. Some still muttered, of course. Pride was hard to swallow, but others began to approach her differently. A sergeant asked, "How did you spot that shimmer?" "I didn't see a thing." A young private leaned closer, whispering, "Is it really the scope? Or just you?" Elena answered the same way each time. "It's not the scope. It's the patience to see what others don't." The brass relic was no longer just a joke. It was becoming a legend within the squad. But legends are fragile. One evening, during a tense march through another valley, a cadet-turned-soldier named Morris couldn't resist poking fun. "Hey, Johnson, when this is over, you gonna donate that thing to a museum? Or maybe sell it on eBay?" His voice carried a forced lightness, a shield against the uncomfortable respect creeping into camp. Elena looked at him evenly. "It's not for sale, not ever." Morris chuckled, but it sounded hollow. Deep down, he knew what the others were beginning to accept. The scope wasn't magic, but Elena's skill made it something more than metal. That night, under a quiet sky, Captain finally approached her directly. He crouched beside her as she cleaned the scope, his eyes drawn to the tarnished brass. "You trust this thing more than any gear we've got." "Why?" Elena paused, running the rag slowly over the eyepiece. "Because it belonged to someone who taught me how to see. Not just look, see. This scope doesn't give me shortcuts. It forces me to pay attention. And paying attention is the only reason we're alive." The captain nodded thoughtfully. He didn't press further. But from that moment on, when Elena spoke, he listened, and the squad noticed. The mocking had quieted. Respect hadn't fully bloomed yet, but the seed was planted. Elena knew it. She felt it in the way soldiers glanced at her differently, in the way silence followed her corrections, in the way her scope, once the punchline, was now handled with caution, as though it carried weight beyond its tarnish. She didn't need them to love the scope. She only needed them to trust what she saw through it. And slowly, painfully, step by step through a hostile land, they did. The Nevada desert stretched wide and merciless, a sea of stone and sand under a white-hot sun. Elena had been here before for training, but this was different. This wasn't routine exercise. This was competition. The annual Joint Forces Marksmanship Challenge brought together units from across the country. Soldiers, cadets, and officers alike came to test their precision, their patience, and their teamwork. The event was as much about pride as skill. Winning meant bragging rights that lasted all year. Elena arrived with her squad early, stepping off the transport vehicle into a camp buzzing with energy. Tents stood in neat rows, flags of different units snapping in the dry wind. Everywhere she looked, soldiers were unpacking gear-sleek rifles, state-of-the-art spotting scopes, and equipment so advanced it looked pulled from the future. She carried her rifle like the rest. But when she laid her pack down and pulled out the brass scope, the familiar ripple of laughter followed. One soldier from another unit pointed. "What the hell is that thing?" Another whistled. "Looks like it came off a pirate ship." A third shook his head. "She's really bringing that to this competition?" Even her own squad shifted uncomfortably, aware of the eyes on them. The mocking was sharper here, laced with rivalry. Elena felt the weight of it, but ignored the noise. She set up the tripod, tightened the screws, and adjusted the eyepiece. The scope wobbled slightly, squeaking as always, before settling into place. The first event was observation. Targets were hidden across miles of desert terrain, disguised among rocks and brush. Spotters had to find them and call out coordinates within strict time limits. High-tech optics flickered with digital rangefinders and image enhancements. Soldiers spoke quickly into radios, relaying numbers. Elena pressed her eye to the brass. The world shrank into the circle she knew so well. Heat shimmered, distorting shapes. To others, the landscape looked empty. To her, it was alive with detail. A shadow stretched wrong against a rock too sharp, too straight. A faint glint betrayed a scope hidden under camouflage. The pattern of brush broke unnaturally where a target lay prone. She whispered coordinates calmly, her voice steady. Her shooter relayed them to the judge. The clock ticked down. When results were announced, Elena's team had identified every hidden target in record time. Many teams missed one or two. Some missed half. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Who called those shots? Her? With that thing? The disbelief was almost louder than the applause. The second event was long-distance shooting. Spotters. Guided shooters through escalating ranges, each target farther and harder to see than the last. This was where ridicule returned. As Elena adjusted her brass scope, a competitor leaned over with a smirk. "You're gonna track a mile with that antique? Good luck." She didn't answer. She breathed deep, settled in, and studied the horizon. Mirage lines twisted violently in the heat, but she read them the way her grandfather had taught her, like sentences written across the air. She called her corrections in a calm rhythm. Wind shifts, elevation adjustments, mirage drift, crack. Steel rang. Again, crack. Steel rang. Her shooter grinned, confidence rising with each hit. Around them, frustration grew. Soldiers with advanced scopes miscalculated, missing plates by feet. Some cursed, some banged fists against the dirt. By the time the final round ended, Alana's team had hit more targets than nearly anyone else. The field went quiet. Spectators gathered, glancing from her old brass scope to the white steel plates in disbelief. Some looked irritated, others intrigued. She can't keep that up forever. No way that scope's really doing it. It's not the scope, it's her. The third and final event was endurance spotting hours of observation under brutal sun, with fatigue weighing on eyes and minds. Most faltered, eyes watering, focus slipping. Elena stayed steady, her breathing slow, her notebook filling with crisp observations. When her team struck their final target, even the judges exchanged impressed looks. When results were tallied, her squad placed higher than they had ever placed before. As soldiers packed up gear, still muttering, Captain Harris stepped forward. He picked up the brass scope, his hand brushing across its worn body. Something caught his eye. Near the eyepiece, hidden beneath layers of tarnish, faint etchings glimmered. He rubbed gently, revealing words inscribed decades ago. Camp Perry. 1954 to 1,000 yards, record distance. The captain froze. His brow furrowed as he read it again, louder this time so others could hear. Camp Perry, 1954, record distance. A hush fell. For many, the words meant little. But for soldiers and marksmen who knew their history, Camp Perry was sacred ground, the site of the national matches, where the best of the best had competed. For over a century. To have a record etched on a scope, there was no small thing. The captain looked at Elena. This belonged to someone who made history. She nodded quietly. My grandfather. The crowd buzzed with new energy. The relic they mocked was suddenly transformed, not just into a piece of history, but into a legacy. One soldier muttered, "No wonder she's so good." Another said, "It's not just the scope. She sees like he did." For the first time, the laughter was gone. That evening, as the desert cooled, Elena sat by the fire with her scope across her lap. Soldiers drifted closer, not to mock, but to ask questions. How do you read mirages like that? What's your method for wind drift? Can you teach us? Elena answered patiently, sharing her grandfather's lessons. You don't trust gadgets to do the thinking. You trust your eyes. You trust discipline. The world tells you everything if you're patient enough to listen. The brass scope gleamed faintly in the firelight, its tarnished scars catching sparks like stars. For the first time, it wasn't a punchline. It was a symbol. Her squad had always respected her quietly, but now soldiers from other units leaned in too. Her story had spread, her skill undeniable. The Nevada competition had not just been about winning. It had been about proving once and for all that she belonged. And as the fire crackled and the stars came out, Elena knew this was only the beginning. The fire crackled low that night in the Nevada desert. Soldiers from different units huddled around in small circles, swapping stories, comparing bruises, and reliving the day's events. But Elena's circle was different. Her brass scope sat across her lap, gleaming faintly in the orange glow, and eyes from every direction drifted toward it like moths to flame. Captain Harris stood nearby, still holding the rag he had used earlier to wipe the tarnish from the brass. He hadn't said much since uncovering the inscription, but his silence carried weight. The other cadets noticed it too. The same captain who never wasted words now seemed deep in thought, his expression unreadable. Finally, he broke the quiet. Camp Perry, 1954, 1,000 yards, record distance. His voice was steady, but something in it carried reverence. "Do you know what that means, Johnson?" Elena nodded slowly. "My grandfather told me the story. But most people thought it was just a story." The captain crouched closer to the fire, his eyes narrowing as though looking into memory itself. It wasn't just a story. Camp Perry is history. Every year since the early 1900s, the best marksmen in the country, military and civilian, have gone there to compete. World champions, Olympic-level shooters, legends in their own right, to set a record there. He paused, letting the words settle. It means you weren't just good. It means you were the best in the world. The murmurs around the fire grew louder. Even the skeptical cadets leaned closer now, curiosity overcoming pride. Elena's throat tightened. She had grown up hearing her grandfather talk about Camp Perry, about that impossible shot. He described the wind, the pressure, the moment when the trigger broke clean. As a child, she believed every word. As she got older, surrounded by doubt, she had begun to wonder if maybe it had been an exaggeration, an old man's way of making the past shine brighter. But the captain's voice left no room for doubt. Harris looked directly at her. "Your grandfather's name was Daniel Johnson, wasn't it?" Her chest tightened further. "Yes, sir." He nodded grimly. "I've heard that name." He was a legend in the shooting community. Men still talk about the Johnson shot. 1,000 yards with equipment that was primitive compared to what we have today. He read the wind and the mirage better than anyone alive at the time, and he etched his record on this very scope. The brass tube in her lap suddenly felt heavier. Not just a tool, not just an heirloom. A torch, a weight of history passed down through her bloodline. One of the skeptical cadets shifted uncomfortably. "Wait, you mean this scope actually was used in a world record?" The captain's eyes hardened. "That's exactly what I mean." And every one of you laughed at it. The fire popped sharply, as if punctuating his words. Several soldiers glanced at each other, shame flickering in their faces. The mocking that once seemed so harmless now hung in the air like a stain. Harris leaned back, folding his arms. "You all see a relic, something outdated and weak. But in the right hands, this scope has already made history. And what I saw today on that range proves it's about to make history again." Elena felt heat rise in her chest, not from the flames, but from a swelling mix of pride and fear. Pride for her grandfather, for the truth of his story, now shining bright. Fear because expectation had suddenly landed on her shoulders. She wasn't just carrying her own dreams anymore. She was carrying his legacy. Silence stretched until one soldier, voice hesitant, spoke. "Sir, if she's carrying a legend's scope, Does that mean she? The captain cut him off sharply. It means nothing unless she earns it. And from what I've seen, she's earning it. Every damn day. The words sent a ripple through the circle. No one dared laugh now. Respect was settling in, replacing ridicule. Later that night, when most had drifted off to sleep, Elena remained awake by the embers. The captain approached quietly, crouching beside her. You handled yourself well. Today, he said. She nodded. Thank you, sir. He studied her carefully, his weathered face softening slightly. I need you to understand something. That inscription isn't just a mark of history. It's a reminder. Men like your grandfather weren't remembered just for a single shot. They were remembered for discipline, for resilience, for making the impossible look routine. That's what you're showing. That's what people are beginning to see? Her voice was quiet, almost fragile. But what if I fail? Harris shook his head firmly. You already faced failure on the range today. You missed one. You corrected. You nailed the next. That's not failure, that's mastery. Don't confuse perfection with greatness. Greatness comes from persistence. Elena blinked against the sting in her eyes. She had carried that scope. For years, mocked for it, doubted for it, doubting herself because of it. Now, for the first time, she felt the weight not as a burden, but as armor. The captain straightened, his shadow tall against the desert stars. Tomorrow, people won't see a rusted scope anymore. They'll see Johnson's granddaughter. They'll see legacy. Make sure they also see why you deserve it. He walked away, leaving her alone with the embers and the scope. She held the brass tube in both hands, tracing the etched inscription with her fair fingertips. The letters were rough, carved by hand, worn by decades of time. Her grandfather's mark, his promise. Whispers of the day's events traveled quickly. By morning, the entire camp buzzed with the story of Daniel Johnson's scope and the cadet who carried it. Some soldiers approached her with respect, others with curiosity, a few with envy, but none with mockery. Her squadmates noticed the change too. Where once they had winced at the laughter directed toward her, now they stood a little taller beside her. Pride replaced embarrassment. When the final ceremony of the competition began, Captain Harris addressed the assembled soldiers. His voice carried with the authority of command. Yesterday, many of you saw a piece of equipment and dismissed it. You mocked it. You mocked her. But you all learned something the hard way. Tools don't win battles. People do. Discipline does. Skill does. And today, one cadet reminded us all of that truth. He motioned to Elena. All eyes turned. For a heartbeat, her throat went dry. But then she stood, brass scope tucked under her arm, her grandfather's words echoing in her heart. The applause that followed was not raucous or mocking. It was steady, firm, and real. In that moment, Elena realized something vital. She was no longer defending herself against laughter. She was carrying forward a name that already belonged to history. Her task now was to prove that she could add to it. And as the ceremony closed and the Nevada desert faded into dusk, she whispered to herself, almost like a vow, this isn't the end of his story. It's the beginning of mine. The Nevada competition changed everything. Word of Elena's performance traveled beyond the dusty range and seeped into barracks, classrooms, and briefing halls. By the time she returned to her base, the whispers had already arrived ahead of her. She's the one who beat the new tech with a relic. They say her calls were flawless. Johnson's granddaughter. For years, those same halls had been filled with snickers about her brass scope, with muttered nicknames like antique anchor and telescope toy. Now, conversations stopped when she entered a room not from ridicule, but from an odd, cautious respect. Elena felt the difference immediately. People no longer avoided her in group drills. Some even sought her out, lingering nearby when she unpacked the scope. At first, she thought they were waiting for another chance to mock her. Instead, they asked questions. How do you read wind without digital meters? What do you look for in the mirage? She hesitated at first, unsure whether to share what she had guarded so fiercely. But then she remembered her grandfather's voice, calm and steady in her childhood backyard, teaching her with infinite patience. He never hoarded knowledge. He passed it forward. And maybe that was what the scope wanted. Now, not just to be carried, but to be shared. So she began teaching. It started with one cadet, a wiry boy from Tennessee, who struggled to call targets correctly. She showed him how to squint at the faint shimmer near the ground, how to watch grass bend in uneven waves, how to trust subtle signs. Within days, his calls improved. Soon, 2 more cadets joined in, then 5. By the end of the week, she had a dozen students gathering around her after drills, notebooks in hand. She never raised her voice or commanded them. She spoke the way. Her grandfather had spoken to her. Patient, observant, direct. Don't rush the call. Trust your first instinct, but verify it. Watch the small things. They'll always tell you the truth before the big ones. Word spread again. The brass scope was no longer just a relic. It had become a classroom, and Elena its reluctant teacher. Captain Harris noticed too. He observed from a distance, arms folded, expression unreadable. Then one evening, he called her aside. You realize what you're doing? He asked. She frowned. Just helping them, sir. He shook his head. No, you're changing the culture. These cadets came here obsessed with tech, with gadgets. Now they're learning discipline. You're pulling them back to fundamentals. That's not small, it's leadership. The word felt strange on her shoulders. Leadership. For so long, she had fought only for herself, trying to withstand ridicule, to prove she belonged. Now others looked to her, not out of pity, but out of trust. But trust carried weight. The turning point came during a joint training exercise in the high plains. Multiple squads were tasked with identifying long-range targets across rolling grasslands, dotted with trees and shifting shadows. Winds whipped unpredictably, and the terrain made modern rangefinders glitch. The exercise quickly devolved into frustration, except for Elena's squad. Her cadets, now students of her method, steadied themselves and worked the fundamentals. One by one, they identified targets others couldn't even see. Their performance outshone every other group. Afterward, soldiers from rival squads approached her, not with scorn, but with open admiration. How did you see that far ridge? My scope blurred out. You were the only one who spotted the dummy target by the creek. How? Elena hesitated again, unsure how much to give away. But Harris's earlier words echoed. You're changing the culture. Maybe that was the point. So she taught them too. Her circle grew. Soldiers who had once laughed now leaned forward, pens scratching, as she explained how to gauge a gust from the sway of distant branches, how to time a call between the heartbeat of shifting winds. Some of them tried to replicate her process with their advanced optics, but even when their tech helped, they admitted it wasn't the same. She had something they couldn't buy, instinct sharpened by discipline. That night, sitting alone with the brass scope, Elena whispered, Grandpa, I think they're finally listening. But leadership, she soon learned, also meant bearing doubt. Not everyone celebrated her rise. A few soldiers resented the attention she drew. One, a tall sharpshooter named Collins, muttered loud enough for others to hear. She's not magic, just lucky. That scope's a prop, nothing more. His words stung, but Elena didn't answer. She didn't need to. The others did it for her. Then why don't you beat her next time? One cadet snapped back. Collins scowled, but said nothing more. For the first time, Elena realized she wasn't standing alone anymore. Her students, her squad mates, They had become her shield. Still, doubts gnawed at her privately. Was she really worthy of this trust? Was she living up to the name etched on the brass? Every night she traced the inscription again, trying to feel her grandfather's steady hand in the grooves. Some nights it calmed her. Other nights it made the weight heavier. Then came the order that would test her like never before. The captain gathered them one morning under a sky painted with streaks of dawn. His expression was grim. Next week, you're heading into live field exercises. Simulated combat with multiple moving squads, targets, and full mission scenarios. This won't be just competition. It will mimic real deployment. And Johnson, his eyes locked on Elena, you're going to be leading the spotting team. Her breath caught. Leading, not assisting, not proving. Leading. Yes, sir, she answered, though her stomach twisted. The days leading up to the exercise blurred into relentless drills. Soldiers crowded around her, hungry for guidance, pushing her to repeat lessons, to explain subtler details. She tried her best, though exhaustion nipped at her heels. At night she lay awake, the brass scope resting beside her cot, almost like a silent companion. On the eve of the mission, Harris found her sitting alone. "You're ready," he said simply. She looked up, startled. "What if I fail them?" He crouched, his voice low. "Leadership isn't about never failing. It's about standing up when others stumble. It's about trust. They already trust you. That's why they'll follow you tomorrow." For the first time, Elena didn't feel like the girl defending her grandfather's relic. She felt like the woman carrying it forward. The morning of the exercise dawned sharp and cold. Squads gathered, adrenaline thick in the air. Elena unfolded the brass scope, steadying it on the ridge. The mocking laughter that had once haunted her was gone. Now, when the soldiers glanced her way, their eyes carried something new: expectation, hope, and belief. She inhaled slowly, grounding herself, her grandfather's voice in her memory. Breathe steady. Trust your eye. Respect the shot. And as the first targets moved across the horizon, Elena knew this was more than just an exercise. This was her proving ground, not just for herself, but for everyone who now carried her lessons in their hearts. The brass scope gleamed faintly in the sunlight, as though proud. The desert morning was sharp, a thin wind slicing across ridges and valleys, carrying with it the smell of dust and anticipation. Elena's squad gathered at the ridge, weapons ready, radios clipped to their vests, eyes scanning the horizon. Beyond them, the simulated battlefield stretched for miles, rolling plains punctuated with rocky outcroppings, hidden targets, and squads from rival units maneuvering like predators and prey. Elena knelt, unfolding the brass scope and adjusting its tripod. The familiar creak of the worn joints brought a strange comfort. This was no longer a relic, no longer the punchline of the barracks. Today, it was the foundation of strategy, the instrument that would guide her squad through chaos. Her students, now disciplined spotters themselves, gathered around. Each carried binoculars or high-tech scopes, but every pair of eyes was trained on her commands. Positions locked. She said quietly, "Stay sharp. Focus on wind, movement, shadows. Don't anticipate, observe." The captain's voice crackled over the radio. "All units, engage targets on my mark. Johnson's team leads the operation." The first round was deceptive in its simplicity. Targets appeared as faint blurs, on ridgelines and among brush. Soldiers with modern scopes fired, many missing by feet. Elena adjusted her brass scope with deliberate patience, taking in wind shifts, mirage distortions, and the subtle twitch of grasses. Target 1, 800 meters. Slight right adjustment wind at base is moving left, she called. Her shooter fired. Steel rang. One by one, the squad followed her calls. Precision after precision. Other units struggled to keep up. Shots rang erratically. Targets missed, frustration mounting in the distance. The desert heat climbed, and fatigue set in, but Elena remained steady. She reminded her team to breathe, to check shadows and heat shimmer, to trust what their eyes told them instead of what their gadgets whispered. By mid-morning, the exercise had shifted from routine to critical. Moving targets appeared across valleys. Quick decisions were required, no time for hesitation. Soldiers from other units yelled corrections into radios, but confusion reigned. Elena crouched low, eye pressed to her brass scope, heart steady. 2 targets, 1,200 meters, moving left to right. Adjust elevation 0.5, wind right shifting. Gradually, her shooter nodded, firing 3 rapid rounds. Every shot hit its mark. The squad's precision under pressure drew murmurs across the field. Competitors squinted at the old brass tube, incredulity spreading. Then came the moment. That would define everything. A simulated ambush triggered on the eastern ridge. Red smoke cannons erupted, simulating enemy positions. The wind shifted abruptly, heat shimmer twisting more violently than any previous test. Soldiers faltered. Digital scopes failed to lock. Radios crackled with frantic corrections. Elena stayed calm. She focused on the movement, the distortion, the faint glint that revealed a sniper's scope hidden among rocks. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind. Breathe steady. Trust your eye. She called out coordinates clearly, calmly, her voice a tether for her team. Left flank, 1,500 meters. Elevation up 0.7. Watch the mirage, it's moving. Faster than the ground. Her shooter fired. Steel sang. Another shot. Another. Targets neutralized. Her students mirrored her precision, correcting for wind and mirage, following her rhythm. By mid-afternoon, the squad had cleared more targets than any other team. They had done it without hesitation, without panic, guided by Elena's patient, precise eye and the brass scope that had become legendary. When the final simulated objective appeared a distant ridge, marked as the command post, all units focused their attention. Many struggled with heat waves and visual distortion. Elena scanned deliberately, noting shadows, dust patterns, and subtle changes in light. Final target, 1,800 meters, slight right drift, wind gusting left at base. Elevation 0.8, she instructed. Her shooter fired. Steel rang, then again. The team worked seamlessly, firing in sync, following her calls. By the time the sun touched the western horizon, Elena's squad had completed the exercise. Flawlessly. Not a single target had been missed. Silence fell over the field. Then came the applause, cautious at first, then louder. Soldiers approached, shaking heads in disbelief. "I don't believe it," one muttered. "They actually did it." Even Captain Harris, who had witnessed countless exercises, allowed himself a small smile. He stepped forward, the dust settling around his boots. "Lieutenant Johnson," he called, voice carrying over the ridge. "You and your team have completed the exercise with perfection. Not because of gadgets, not because of luck, but because of discipline, observation, and leadership." He turned to the surrounding units. "Take note. This is how skill and patience look in action." The camp erupted with whispers and exclamations. Soldiers who had mocked the brass scope now looked at it as a symbol of mastery. Elena knelt by it, fingers tracing the engraved inscription near the eyepiece. Camp Perry, 1954 to 1,000 yards, record distance. Her grandfather's legacy was alive, yes, but now it had expanded. His record had once been about a single shot. Today, it symbolized an enduring principle. Focus, patience, and respect for the craft could outmatch the flashest gear. Soldiers approached her, some shyly, some boldly. One said, "Your calls. They saved our team more than once. You taught us to see things we couldn't even imagine. Elena nodded quietly. You saw it too. You just needed to look. 4. The first time in years, she allowed herself to feel the weight lift from her chest. She was no longer the cadet defending a mock scope. She was the leader who had earned her team's trust and the respect of seasoned soldiers. She had proven her grandfather's legacy and her own. As night fell and the desert sky lit up with stars, the squad gathered around the fire. Laughter replaced tension, not mocking, but camaraderie, relief, and pride. Elena set the brass scope, carefully beside her, now a centerpiece, a silent teacher. Soldiers jostled each other playfully, recounting their hits and near misses, occasionally glancing at the scope with awe. Captain Harris approached one last time. Today, you didn't. Just lead. You inspired. Remember that. Carry it forward. Elena nodded, finally understanding. Leadership wasn't just about skill. It was about persistence, teaching, and honor. It was about carrying a legacy and passing it forward, not just surviving mockery, but transforming it into respect. The brass scope gleamed faintly in the firelight, worn but powerful, a symbol of history, resilience, and mastery. Elena rested her hand on it gently, whispering softly, "Thank you, Grandpa. I won't let it end here." And under the endless desert, stars, Elena knew it never would.